Everyone is talking about peptides for weight loss, okay? For anti-aging, for muscle recovery, but nobody is talking about what peptides could mean specifically for your feet and for the injuries and conditions that I treat, that I know you treat as well, every single day. Today, I want to change that. Hello, my name is Dr. Imaze Marian Davis. I am a board-certified podiatrist, a foot and ankle surgeon, a wound care specialist, and also a certified physician with minimum invasive surgery. What exactly are peptides? Before we get into anything specific, let's make sure we're speaking the same language, because peptides gets thrown around constantly online without much explanation. At the most basic level, a peptide is a short chain of an amino acid. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. I call it the building blocks of life. The difference between a peptide and a full protein is simply just the length. Peptides are a short chain of amino acids, typically fewer than 50 amino acids linked together. Your body already produces thousands of peptides naturally. They function as signaling molecules, tiny messengers that tell your cells what to do. Some tell your pancreas to release insulin, which is really important, especially when you're diabetic. Some regulate your sleep cycle. Some trigger growth and repair processes in your tissue, especially when it comes to injuries. Hormones like oxytocin and vasopressins, these are peptides. Collagen, which you've probably heard of in the context of skin and joint health, is built from peptide chains. What's changed in recent years is our ability to synthesize specific peptides in a lab to isolate a particular sequence of amino acids and study what happens when you introduce more of it into the body. That's where this conversation gets interesting and where the science is advancing rapidly. The peptides you're seeing discussed online, things like semaglutide, which you may know better as Ozempic, or BPC 157, are synthetically produced versions of peptide sequences, some of which occur naturally in the body, some of which are modified versions designed to have a targeted effect. So when someone says they're taking a peptide, what does that mean? They're introducing a specific amino acid sequence into their body with the goal of triggering a particular biological response. The question is always, which response, how reliable, and at what risk? Now, here's where the story gets complicated and honestly more interesting than most people realize. Peptides as a class don't have one clean legal history. It's not a story of they were legal or then they were banned. It's messier than that. And understanding it actually helps you make sense of why so much peptide content is online and exists in this gray zone. For decades, certain peptides went through the full FDA approval process and became prescription medications. Insulin, for example, is a peptide. So is oxytocin. So is semaglutide, the active ingredient in Ozempic, which went through this rigorous clinical trials, received FDA approval, and is now fully legal and prescribable medication. But alongside that regulated pathway, a separate world exists. Compounding pharmacies. These are licensed pharmacies that can custom prepare medications for patients when a commercially available drug doesn't meet their specific needs. So for years, compounding pharmacies operated in a gray area with certain peptides, producing them for patients under physician supervision, even without the formal FDA approval for those specific compounds. That gray area started narrowing significantly around 2023 and 2024. The FDA began placing a number of commonly used peptides, including BPC 157, into what it calls Category 2 of its bulk drug substance list. Category 2 means the FDA has identified significant safety concerns and compounding pharmacies are prohibited from producing those substances for human use. Now, the reasoning? limited human clinical data, concerns about manufacturing, purity, and potential immune reactions to this substance. In other words, the FDA's position was, we don't have enough evidence that this is safe enough to allow a widespread compounded use. But here's where things stand right now. And this is genuinely current. In April, just a few months ago, 2026, the FDA removed BPC 157 from its Category 2 restricted list. And in July 2026, the FDA Advisory Committee is scheduled to evaluate whether BPC 157 and several other peptides should be formally added to the approved compounding list. People, this is current. RFK Jr. has publicly advocated for expanded peptide access, and the regulatory tide appears to be shifting. So we are right now, as I'm recording this, in an active transitional moment for peptide regulation in the United States, which is exactly why this conversation matters today. So with that context established, let's talk about the specific peptides that, as a podiatrist, I find most relevant to the conditions I treat every day. That's BPC 157, which stands for Body Protection Compound 157. Think about what I see most often in my practice, such as Achilles tendon pathology, like Achilles tendon rupture, plantar fasciitis, post-surgical tendon repair, chronic inflammation that just won't resolve. These are all soft tissue injuries, and soft tissue, especially tendon, we all know is notoriously slow to heal. Why? Because tendons have very limited blood supply. So BPC 157 has been studied specifically in the context of tendon repair. Research published in the Journal of Applied Physiology showed that BPC 157 significantly accelerated the outgrowth of tendon fibroblasts. Those are the cells responsible for building and repairing tendon tissue and increased their ability to migrate and survive under stress. A separate study found it upregulates growth hormone receptors and tendon fibroblasts, which essentially makes those cells more responsive to the signals telling them to repair and regenerate. Okay? We are in a world of regenerative medicine, people. From a podiatric standpoint, that's not a small thing. We're talking about a mechanism that could theoretically address one of the core reasons foot and ankle injuries take so long to heal. Now, I want to be straight with you because I think you deserve honesty over hype. A 2025 systematic review published in a leading orthopedic sports medicine journal reviewed the entire body of BPC 157 literature for musculoskeletal injuries. They found 35 preclinical studies, meaning animal studies, and only one human clinical study. One. That's not nothing, but it's also not at the level of evidence that we need to call this proven in humans. The preclinical data is genuinely promising. The human data is not there yet. And that distinction matters, both scientifically and legally, which brings me back to where things stand right now from a regulatory perspective. BPC 157 is not FDA approved for any medical indication. Until very recently, it was classified as a restricted substance that compounding pharmacies could not legally produce. That status has just shifted. It was removed from the restricted list in April 2026, but it has not yet been moved to the approved list either. It sits at this moment in a genuine gray zone. Access through regulated licensed compounding pharmacies may be reopening, but it is not yet formalized. What you find being sold online as a research chemical remains unregulated, unstandardized, and carries real risk because there is no oversight of what's actually in it or at what dose. The July 2026 FDA Advisory Committee review could change the landscape significantly. I'll be watching it closely, and I hope you too. So here's what I want to leave you with. The conversation around peptides is not going away. it's accelerating. And as a podiatrist, I think it's my job to make sure that when something with potential relevance to your foot and ankle health enters that conversation, you are hearing about it from someone who actually understands the anatomy and the conditions involved. BPC 157 is not something I can prescribe for you today, but the regulatory moment we are in right now is genuinely shifting. And if the human clinical data catches up, the implication for tendon healing, post-surgical recovery, and chronic foot conditions such as ankle sprains and ligament sprains could be significant. The science is early. The regulatory landscape is actively evolving, and I will keep you updated as both of those things change. If you found this useful, share it, because this is exactly the kind of conversation more people need to be having with their doctors.